Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session, which is part of our third annual Wellbeing Festival. I'm Rebecca. I am a business development manager at Dentsu and one of the co-chairs on the Dentsu Wellbeing Committee. I'm also joined today by one of our other fantastic co-chairs, Scott, who is sustainability manager at Dentsu as well. And together we're going to lead you through today's session. I'm very excited to bring you today's panel. So we've got speakers from the world's leading independent conservation organisation and one of our fantastic clients, WWF, from the support organisation for the advertising and media industry, who you should definitely all know, NABS. And we've also got a brilliant online educator and blogger who's got over 2 million TikTok followers. So the theme for Mental Health Awareness Week this year is nature, a subject which really has never been kind of more important globally, especially as we kind of face a climate crisis. COVID has really demonstrated that what happens to any of us can really happen to all of us. And if we can repair our relationship with nature, we'll experience a greater unity, greater harmony, and better conditions for everybody on the planet. So that brings me nicely on to today's session, which we're going to talk about post-lockdown anxiety. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's feeling a little bit anxious about resuming kind of a normal life, getting out and about, sort of being around a lot of people, being back in the office, sort of that hustle and bustle of normal life, commuting. You know, it's certainly making me feel a little bit nervous, I guess. You know, I've spent a lot of lockdown personally on my own. I live alone, I live in a flat, you know, so I've not had a lot of space, I've been quite isolated. So suddenly throwing yourself back into sort of a lot of people, you know, there is definitely a sort of a little bit of anxiety, I guess, around that. So in today's session, we're going to chat through some of the trends that we're seeing as kind of lockdown lifts and we're coming out of it, how we can really kind of build up our own resilience and create some coping mechanisms which can help us through the sort of coming months. And what leaders can really do to support their people, our people, which will definitely be, you know, ever more important over the months to come. So enough from me. I don't want to kind of chat for too long. Let me hand over to today's panel. They're going to introduce themselves and kick off today's session. So Dr. Julie, would you like to kick off first?
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm Dr. Julie Smith. I'm a clinical psychologist and I worked in the NHS for about 10 years and then ran a small private practice and more recently started sort of providing educational content online using social media, and turns out people were hungry for that sort of conversation because it's sort of really changed things for me, and lots of people are listening to that. So and part of those sort of things that I've been doing have been you know, working with charities like Sport in Mind, who help people to improve their mental health by getting outside and moving their bodies, and so yeah, this is a subject quite close to my heart.
And Kate, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning everybody. I'm Kate and I'm Regional Director of NABS, which is the industry charity which Rebecca has already mentioned. I've worked with NABS for over 20 years. Something I'm very passionate about is the well-being of everybody in and around the advertising and media industry. That's the core of what we do. And in the last, I've worked in advertising all my life prior to doing this job. And it's a stressful business. It always has been and probably always will be. But I think the last year obviously has been incredibly difficult for everybody in the world. And in our industry, it's been a very stressful place to be. And there are a lot of resulting numbers and things that we're doing that I think I'll try and highlight today to talk about what it is that we can do to help people's well-being, and also to give you a flavour of what's going on in the industry in terms of how people are feeling about going back to work. More of that in a minute. That's me.
Thanks, Kate. And Will.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name's Will Baldwin-Cantello and I work at WWF. I'm the Director of Nature-Based Solutions, which generally means how we use nature to tackle climate change. But today, I guess we're thinking about nature as a solution for our health. It's with that idea in mind that I led the work at WWF with the Mental Health Foundation to publish this guide, Thriving with Nature, which is available for free through our shop. And it's really just helping to encourage people like you and me who are struggling for time or don't know where to start, to encourage us and show us how we might use and engage with nature for our own mental well-being. And I'm delighted to join the discussion.
Amazing, thanks Will. I'll definitely have to get myself a copy of that. Perfect, well look, thank you everyone. I will now hand over to Scott, who's going to lead today's panel. Have a great time.
Thanks Rebecca, and thank you panelists. So Dr. Julie, could you please help us set the context? What are you seeing in society? What are you seeing from the world as we move now out of lockdown?
Sure. Well, it's been a massive adjustment for lots of people, and I think as people start to, open up again and move into the new normal, as that's sort of set out to be, I think there's a lot of anxiety and stress, and rightly so. That's how we're set up, and a lot of the conversations are around how odd and difficult it feels to go back into a social life that used to be the norm, but now gives us that kind of butterflies feeling, or it doesn't feel comfortable. And for me, a lot of the education that I've been trying to put out is saying that that's normal. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. And that's not something then to be avoided. It's the things that we do least often, things that appear sort of novel and different, your brain is set up to give you a little spike in stress response. And so the fact that we haven't been doing those things for a long time means that it's going to give us that little, the sort of pounding heart and the butterflies feeling and that sort of thing to begin with. And as we get back into those things more, we will, that stress response will calm again, and we will get back into the swing of things. But yeah, there is a lot of anxiety around sort of socializing, but also, lots of health anxiety, huge amounts of health anxiety and contamination fears, and those sorts of things that aren't going to go away anytime soon, because we're still living with this thing, and it's going to be a global problem for quite some time, isn't it? So, and lots of those fears are warranted. So it's very difficult for us to just sort of leave that to one side. But again, like Miranda was saying, that lots of people have been really isolated, and that has a profound impact on our mental health. We just can't underestimate the impact that's had on lots of people. So we're dealing with a huge psychological fallout that influences people in lots of different ways.
I was reading that some psychologists are describing what they fear is a mental health pandemic to follow the medical pandemic that we're facing now. And using that same terminology, something that Dentsu was really trying to work toward is looking at the parity of physical health and mental health, because many people understand if you're physically unwell, it's normal that you would take time off, or you would go to the hospital, or you go to see a professional, but we're not quite there yet with certain demographics. This idea of my mental health has a profound impact on my human experience and on my life, and indeed on my physical experience as well. So I really liked what she was saying about, that idea of like, this is normal. This is your body having a completely normal reaction to what's going on. And the more that we can, I guess, breathe out and realize that this is not abnormal. This is a normal response. And I want to come back to you and get some tips on those if you have any initial thoughts.
Sorry, go on. No,
please.
Yeah, I just think it's a really tricky one, isn't it, with mental health, because of the stigma associated with it. There's a lot of the messages I put out are saying, well, having fluctuations in your mental health is a normal part of being human, and yet that doesn't mean we kind of brush it aside and don't deal with it in the same way that we would if we were feeling physically unwell in any way. We would make the adjustments we needed to make to give our body the chance to recover, and we need to be able to kind of treat our sort of mental health with that same respect, really.
I think that's really interesting what you're saying. I also feel that we've never been in this situation before, so many of us just don't know how to deal with it. And going on to a point that I'll come back to in a minute, I think when you're talking to people who are running businesses and who are trying to look after the people who are coming back to work, it's a massive, massive job. and we're all learning, aren't we? And it's just not a really, it's just an unprecedented situation. But that's why we need help from people like you and just raising the issues and making sure that we understand as much about it as we possibly can.
So true. Thank you, Kate. Will, I wanted to bring you in as well, because you were talking about nature, and of course, nature is the theme of this, I guess, the Mental Health Awareness Week this year. And we're really grateful that, you know, the guy that you co-authored with the Mental Health Foundation explores the science between the link between nature and well-being. Could you tell us more about sort of how that came about? And I think that's really fascinating.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, it's something that I feel, you feel, probably many of the people in school instinctively feel that when they spend time in nature, whether they would describe it in this way or not, but it certainly boosts our mental well-being. And over the last decade or so, what we have instinctively felt has been really well translated into science. And so we really now have a growing understanding of how that benefit is delivered. And really, it comes about in I'm going to broadly categorize this in two ways, but you could do it in any other way. But maybe there's the direct response, which is there are aspects of nature that have a psychological and physiological response in us, which helps us move from the flight and fight mode that we're often in as we, you know, in a normal period, we're dashing around on commutes around cities, on Zoom calls, we've got WhatsApps buzzing in, we've got doors ringing. And you know, traffic, all of that kind of keeps us in fight or flight. But when we go into nature, our body does respond in such a way that we can move into our rest and digest mood. And that's partly through the sights and the sounds, and some of it's actually the scents in forests as well. Our body kind of reacts in that way, which then gives our mind space to restore, build up some resilience, and helps us then through the rest of the days. So there's that kind of direct response, and then there's the indirect stuff. And this is where nature can be a really good facilitator of other things that are really good for our mental health, like meeting up with people. Being in nature is a great space to be socializing. It's also a great trigger for creativity, whether that's drawing or writing, which is also good for us. And even volunteering in nature gives us that boost of contributing and undertaking a kind of meaningful activity. And all these things can sit together really nicely with our time in nature and create a good support for mental health.
You know, when Rebecca was indicating in her comments, a lot of what we're facing now in terms of societal challenges, world challenges, is because of this loss, this imbalance of our relationship with nature. And I think more that we can encourage people to go out and experience nature, they will have a greater appreciation for what it means to live in harmony with this planet, as opposed to having a sort of extractive mindset. And, you know, we're really grateful to all the work that you and WWF do to help people understand that, you know, this is a symbiotic relationship. We thrive when nature thrives. Nature thrives when we thrive. So, but I'm thinking as well of people that might not be fortunate enough to have nature near where they live. Would you have any thoughts of how they can incorporate something into their lives?
Yeah, and just responding to what you were saying, I think you're right. There's a great irony in our exposure to infectious diseases, as the coronavirus has turned out to be, is exacerbated by the way that we encroach and fragment and degrade ecosystems. And yet at the same time, there has been this response over the last year where people have really valued nature. And the research that the Mental Health Foundation have done all the way through the last year has shown that time in nature has been one of the key coping mechanisms for most people with stress. And in fact, the surveys that are published this week have shown that 70% of people have found being in nature lifts their mood, and 2/3 have found it brings positive emotions, and calm, wonder, and inspiration being some of those. But if, you know, a lot of us do live in cities, and a lot of people will not necessarily be aware that going to nature will have these benefits. And so this is something that we definitely need to be bringing to people and highlighting to people. If indeed we are in a very urban area and there isn't much access to nature, or we find getting out difficult, or accessibility is a challenge, there are things we can do closer to home. It's even helpful to you know, surround ourselves with plants. It is helpful to surround ourselves with photos of a natural space that you once visited that brings back memories and feelings that you had in that space. It's the sounds of nature we can all bring into our homes now. Those are things that we can do very close to us. And actually that I think is a good thing to carry through as we start to return to the offices and we start to expose ourselves to all these triggers of fight and flight mode. Why not on our commute listen to the sounds of nature, or take with us a photo of a place that we really enjoyed over the last year to keep with us at our desk? Maybe it's about choosing to read a book that's about natural places. Waterlogged by Roger Deakin has been a great, has been talked about very often as a good read if you are struggling with depression or anxiety. And there are things like that where we can, even if we struggle to get out into nature, which is certainly, you know, the ideal situation, we can bring nature to us and help us to keep it in our minds throughout the day.
When you were talking about commuting as well, it made me think actually when businesses are looking at the redesign of their office spaces post the, you know, the future of work, many of them are choosing to incorporate elements of nature, you know, plants, living walls, things like that, because it does create so much of what you're describing, a creative space, more calm, better air quality. So this idea of maybe we are in the city center, but we're still welcoming in that nature because we're starting to see actually the benefits it has on humans. Kate, I really want to learn more about your thoughts on well-being and where it sits in part of business strategy, because NABS has been such a vital resource for our industry and have supported us through, you know, many challenging times to date. And, you know, over the past year, we're so grateful. So I guess, what are your thoughts on well-being and business strategy, and what do you feel that leaders can do to really make a difference for their people?
That's a very big question. but, if only I had the answer. I think being cognizant of how everybody is feeling is the first thing that leaders can do, is to really listen to how people are feeling and be patient with people. A huge number of people who we've spoken to in the industry never want to go back to the office. And those who do want to go back to the office don't want to go back to the office in the same way. There's the nervousness that people have already talked about in terms of being in close contact with many people, which none of us have been for over a year now. There's that. So there's all sorts of stuff that people can do, that bosses can do practically. You've just talked about reconfiguring offices, which is going on all over the place at the moment, but taking into consideration the point that you were making and the point that Will was making about you can actually bring nature inside, because I'm absolutely fascinated by this. I'm so lucky that I live in such a beautiful place, but I'm so aware that many, many people don't. And many people, even on my team at NABS, live in, you know, one-bedroom flats in high-rise buildings in the centre of London, who haven't seen anyone for over a year and haven't even seen a tree. You know, it's these things that really, I think the people who are running businesses within the industry need to be aware of and need to take seriously. So when we talk about well-being, I'm no expert in well-being. I'm an expert in what NABS does to help support and champion well-being within the industry. And we run masterclasses that help people build resilience to pressure and build their confidence and all sorts of stuff like that. And we run coaching for people who are struggling. And you know, that's basically what we're there to do. And as you said, Scott, kindly, you know, we've done a lot of that for you and for many businesses over the years, and we need to be doing more. But the industry needs to be doing more as a whole. They need to put well-being absolutely at the centre of their business. Don't just talk about it. Really listen to what people need, and it will make a real difference. And I think what Julie was talking about earlier, which was now how the brain is wired. And again, I'm no expert in this, but Julie is, and she might want to jump in here. But we know that the brain senses danger when faced with rapidly changing circumstances, and the effect that that's had on people working in our industry, I'm sure across the globe in all industry, is a lack of motivation, a lack of drive, a lack of confidence. Because I think there's some kind of hormone that produces or takes away the energy that you normally have in order to deliver the kind of creativity that we need, that is absolutely at the core of our industry. So it's stuff like that needs to be acknowledged and understood and worked through with employees to make sure that they have the support that they need. Because if you don't have your talent around you, you don't have a business. You have to look after your people. People first, you know, it's the most important thing. And as I said earlier, this is completely unprecedented. And it's not easy navigating it because we've never had to face these problems before, but it has to be done. And NABS is there to support, individuals, employees and employers alike. So I suppose that's really what I'd like to say on that one. Mm. I'd love Julie to come back in on the brain thing, really, because I think the industry that thrives on creative energy, is struggling. And I don't know, Julie, if you've got anything to add to what I've said there.
Yeah, I mean, you said that brilliantly. It's a real issue, isn't it? I think a lot of jobs require that sort of creativity that the computers can't provide for us. That's sort of where the world is headed, isn't it? And yet you can't be creative relentlessly. You can't be creative without rest and routine and replenishing in between. So I think that's where the world needs to change as this industry, but also others, become the human jobs, become the creative ones. We have to recognise that you can't put creativity on a factory line. It's just it's not without losing lots of staff. Anyway, you have to sort of be able to nurture that energy in people and give them a sense of control and rest so that they can kind of recuperate and rebuild that sort of energy and sense of ownership and all of those things. But yeah, absolutely.
I think that and I won't labour the point here because I know we need to talk about other things, but I think collaboration brings creativity, and it's quite hard to collaborate on Zoom calls. I know that we've done it and we've all been doing it for a long time, but it gets exhausting. And I think, bringing people back together will be really good for creativity as well, getting people in the same room together. So, yeah. Thank you.
Maybe even outside together. But I think, it was a great thought to bring in Dr. Julie. And I'd really like to, hand you back the mic, Dr. Julie, because our teams are experiencing burnout and pressures like literally never before seen. Do you have any thoughts on how they can find healthy coping mechanisms in the face of these challenging times? Because the pressures just seem like they're never going away, but there must be something that we can do to better support each other and ourselves.
Yeah, I think there's sort of almost two parts to it, isn't there? There's the, we can kind of accept all pressures, or we can kind of try to work together with organisations to change some of them. But also there are things that we can't change. There are pressures that we can't change. And when that's the case, I think we have to bring it back to basics. We have to come back to those sort of foundations of good mental health, or I sometimes call it the sort of mental health immune system. The things that keep you physically well also help to keep you mentally and psychologically well. So things like really prioritizing sleep, physical movement, getting outside in nature, and interestingly, things like physical movement and exercise are just up there at the top. They just beat everything in terms of the full impact that they can have on your well-being. But if you are physically moving in nature, that effect is even greater. So, if someone lives in a city and they can get out to a park to do their run, as opposed to going on a treadmill in the house or in a gym or something, then they're going to feel the added benefits of all that. So those sorts of things, and eating well, but also, that massive issue that we've all had to deal with is social connection. We don't do well. I think I can't remember the piece of research, but loneliness has been associated with, I think they said that it's the equivalent, chronic loneliness is the equivalent to sort of smoking in terms of the impact it can have on your physical health and your mental health. So, we just can't underestimate the costs of not coming back together at some points. And I know you were saying, Kate, about the sort of creativity side as well, that getting together for some sort of bigger cause and creating something together, that has huge impact on our well-being, and being able to connect with other people and work on something that gives us a sense of meaning and purpose. It has, a huge impact. So even the process of getting back to work, however that looks, so if some people only want to come into the office certain days, and employers are, you know, kind enough that they're saying, you know, let's give people some control over this and let's adjust to this new world. Fantastic, you know, because also if people feel like they're choosing it and have a sense of agency and control over the way their life is structured, that enhances well-being too. So it's a win-win if it's possible within that business. So yeah, it's a real mix, isn't it? I think there isn't one kind of magic silver bullet that answers it all. It's how can we get all of those seemingly small things that seem to have a small impact and accumulate them all together, and gradually, you know, I mean, I once did a video where I was sort of trying to show people how those small things impact. You know, if you sort of pour cordial, like a Ribena, into water, and if you just pour a little bit, it doesn't really seem to have much impact. But, you know, a few more of those, and actually the general colour of that water starts to change. And it's a bit like that with things that help with mental health and physical health. It's all of those small things. You know, if you make that effort to sort of eat well every day, then a month later, you start to feel a bit different, and it's hard to quantify all those things, but they do accumulate and they do have an impact altogether. So yeah, I think it's lots of things all sort of mixed in.
I think it's an absolutely essential point to identify that there is no one single solution. Everyone's situation is different. You know, mental health always will exist along that spectrum between surviving and thriving, and depending on where people are, they will need different interventions. Either it'll be, you know, something like, you know, the support that Kate mentioned that NABS offers, or will need to actually be so bad that it will require, you know, actual, you know, long-term professional support. And ideally, people are able to self-identify and catch themselves before they get too far, you know, into that red zone. So there's some really interesting questions that are starting to come from the chat that I thought we could jump into. The first one is just a quick one, I think, for Will, and then there's an interesting one as well for both, I think, Dr. Julie and Will. But Will, do you have any tips on enjoying nature when the weather is horrible? And so the context here is this person says they'd really like to go and spend more time outside, but the weather is actually getting them down and not making them want to leave the house. So they were just seeing if you had any quick tips there.
Yeah, I can empathise with that. Hasn't it felt like this winter has dragged and dragged? And I've got a 1-year-old and a nearly 3-year-old, and I just wanted to get them out, but when it's cold and wet, it's just no good for them. So it's difficult, isn't it? And we've got to be honest about that. I think the only thing, I think if there was a Swedish person on this call, they'd cite I think it's a Swedish saying that there's no such thing as bad weather, there's just bad clothing. So, I mean, if you're brave enough, I think all weathers can be, you know, we can experience something, whether it's the thrill of wind and rain on our face or the hilarity of it. But otherwise, you know, it's we can plan a little bit maybe on good days, bring some things back inside. I don't know, you know, whether creativity is something that resonates with whoever sent this question in, but, you know, bringing in leaves, flowers, branches from the outside when it's a nice day. And we've done this with our children as well, and drawing or doing craft with those objects on a rainy, windy day. It's engaging with nature, connecting with nature. I guess one of the things to really bear in mind to get the best from nature for our well-being is to really think and connect with it. But using all our senses to engage with nature, understand it, explore it, and that helps us also. It helps support a kind of mindful practice, which helps to alleviate some of the distractions and stresses by being curious about what's in front of us. So that's all I can say, but certainly it's difficult, and thank goodness we've got a little bit of sunshine, and hopefully, you know, spring and summer will really kick in now, and that will help us all.
Thank you, Will. There's two things that I've always cherished about nature. One is that it makes me feel insignificant. So I have all my stresses, all my anxieties, all my worries, and then I go and I just realize that I am literally a dust speck floating through this great expansive universe, and that's always quite comforting once your ego sort of gets out of the way and allows you to feel small amidst it all. And then the second bit is nature and its cyclical ways remind us that would we appreciate springtime if we didn't have winter? Winter and autumn reminds us that, you know, sometimes we do need to cover ourselves up and we have to go down in order to burst forth later. And then I've always found, those two things really comforting, whether it's, looking at nature and I guess feeling ourselves and finding our place within that, those great cycles. But there's another really interesting comment that I wanted to place to Dr. Julie and Will initially, but please, Kate, come in as well from the audience. So could telling people who have serious depression or severe anxiety to enjoy nature be reductive, or is there real scientific evidence that this will help? So, Will, I'm not sure if there's anything from the guide, and then please, Dr. Julie, from your own expertise.
There is huge evidence behind this, and it just keeps coming as well from sort of neuroscience is really pushing forward and giving us incredible data on all of this stuff. And if you take people, there was an incredible study done with people who had sort of long-term severe depression who were undergoing talking therapies treatment. And people who, so one of those groups had that therapy in a hospital setting, so in a big building, and the other group had that therapy in a garden setting, in the sort of botanical garden. And I think the difference in the remission rate was about 60-something percent, 60 to 70%. That's huge effect sizes. The only difference was being around nature at that point and having a chance to sort of walk around outdoors and spending time in nature. So yes, in no way is that reductive. I think even in my days of working in acute mental health hospitals, one of the hospitals I worked in had the wonderful privilege of having a garden space. Used it all the time with people who were most unwell. Being outside and walking in the fresh air in a green space has immediate effects and cumulative effects over time. So no, I think sometimes when people are suffering with severe depression or any other mental health problem, we have to go back to those sort of basics of can we just get outside? Can we sit in the garden for an hour? And can we, and those things are more achievable than some of the more sort of complex and detailed strategies and things like that. Those sorts of things can bring us to a level where we're more able then to work on our well-being with other things. So no, absolutely, I would recommend it for everyone.
And I'd echo that entirely. And I think it's really important to see this as we're certainly not proposing that nature in itself is going to solve everything, but it can be a really important complement to other responses as well. I think in Thriving with Nature, we're very conscious of this, and we're very explicit in saying there will be days when the things that getting outdoors is going to be really, really difficult, and it might not be. You might not feel like you can do it today or this morning or this afternoon. And so be kind to yourself and just have it be ready when you feel able to make the most of that. And as Julie said, by all means, start small, 5 minutes in the garden, 15 minutes at the park, and just even that kind of step can help. And when we feel able and ready, then we can, go further afield or stay outside for longer as we feel ready.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm thinking anecdotally as well. Someone in my family was struggling with really severe depression, and actually their psychologist started just by having them plant seeds. And she was like, what is the point of this? What am I doing? But it was working in the dirt. It was working. It was taking care of something. I guess learning to care for something and watch it grow, and maybe just sort of getting out of one's own head. So yeah, I can relate at a personal level as well.
Sowing seeds is also a great rainy day activity. It's cold and wet outside. We could sow some seeds on the windowsill. That's what I've got going on at the moment here. There you go.
We came back to those tips as well. And I guess, quick plug for people within Dentsu, we are going to be sending around a link where you can apply to get a house plant and to actually grow at home. So we want to bring the benefits of nature to home. And so we've reserved some that we can send out to you. So look out for that later in the week. So just coming back to some of the really interesting questions. So there's one specifically around traveling into work. So maybe for Dr. Julie here, is this person feels really anxious about traveling into work. So they're asking if you had any tips on how to overcome those fears and anxieties.
I think the way that we talked earlier about if it's something that you used to do and it used to feel normal and absolutely fine, and it's about having had a big break from this thing and it feels new and it feels anxiety provoking because maybe, I don't know, if you're on a crowded train or something and you're worried about sort of contamination and things like that, then those sorts of spikes in anxiety that are new tend to dissipate quite sort of well with repetition. So part of that sort of experience is recognizing this is a normal spike. This feels stressful because it's new and there's a big change, and a lot of that is about acknowledging that our sort of common humanity, that lots of people will be feeling that way, and it's okay to feel that way. And that feeling, if we can sit with it and keep repeating that behavior, that feeling will calm. The body sort of habituates to it and recognizes, if I do this every day and I'm safe, I need to respond with such a spike in stress anymore. So if it's that sort of situation, and it's not related to another sort of anxiety disorder that's been ongoing for a long time, then those sorts of things will calm. And really then the sorts of skills that are helpful are things like self-compassion, being kind to yourself and doing what helps in the meantime, whether if it helps to listen to a podcast on the train or read a book or those sorts of things, or music that you find comforting, those sorts of things that just help to kind of soothe you through the discomfort of it, but also recognizing that feeling is safe. Your body is working at its best when it is giving you that stress response, and your brain is just saying, this is new, stay alert, watch out, and that's okay. And after a time you can sort of calm the body again. But if you're doing that every day and you start to feel the tiredness from that sort of stress response every day, it really helps to do things at the end of the day to help you sort of bring that back down again. So maybe that might be a sort of, walk in the local park or out in nature somewhere, or that might be, relaxation exercises or meditation or, hot bath, those sorts of things, that whatever it is for you that helps you to sort of de-stress and calm that down again.
People have been discussing this idea of like a digital commute where people tell their minds and tell their bodies, this is how I get ready for my working day. So maybe it is a walk around the park, if they have a dog or just by themselves or listening to a podcast, but same thing to wind down like afterwards. And I wonder if people could continue that, if they've done so, in finding, what is something that makes me feel good in the morning and then makes me actually wind down, and reframing, maybe challenging that idea of I am stressed because of my commute, and saying, well, how can I make it better? Maybe I could choose to bike to work and benefit from that. Maybe I can go a different way that goes through a park. Maybe leave a bit earlier or leave a bit later. Take advantage of some of the flexible working practices, which I think would really work nicely. So another, we're going to say something, Dr. J.
Yeah, I had another sort of thought about a skill that I have written about in my book, actually, which is about how looking at the horizon. So when you're out and about, so if there's a time, if you commute to work in the car or the train or something, if there's a point at which you are walking to the office or something, if you look out to the horizon, the process of doing that with your eyes kind of sends a signal to your brain to calm the stress response. So it has a sort of a biological impact that allows you to, even if you're stressed and you're dealing with a lot, allows you to sort of calm the mind and sort of increases your threshold of stress. So another really small and simple thing, if you're in the office for the day and things are stressful or difficult, get outside, even just for 10 minutes, walk and just look at the horizon and expand. So we sort of dilate our gaze to take in a more panoramic view. Whereas when we're stressed and we're on our screens, we've got a very sort of tunnel vision. But even those small physiological changes of dilating the gaze and looking out at a horizon can have these sort of quite significant impact on that stress level. So just bring it down in the moment so that then you're ready to go back in and have a go again.
I didn't know that. That is a really, really insightful bit of advice. Thank you. I'm going to put that on Post-it and put it on my screen. Go outside, look at the horizon.
Look out the window, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Outside. So I think this is something that everyone is facing, is this sort of like Zoom fatigue. There's a really interesting question from the audience on, does anyone have any tips or maybe ways of working that maybe Kate and your team or Will over at WWF, have you discovered any ways of getting around Zoom fatigue and having more meaningful meetings?
I think I've definitely suffered from it. It was novel to start with, and it was quite good fun. And actually, in some ways, it's improved communication between my team, my regional team, and the rest of the London team, actually, because we've had many more meetings than we would normally, because normally I'd be getting on a train and going to London probably 4 or 5 times a year. But now I'm having something like 6 meetings a week. That started off being a good thing. And then it became a chore, to be honest. If any of my NABS colleagues are listening, sorry about that. But I think we've all sort of felt the same. And I think what's important is to try and limit them, and to try and make sure that you don't extend the time that you're on the call. So you can actually, there is an advantage to Zoom, depending on the kind of account that you have. You can actually really limit it and try to keep the meetings short. Unless they're conversational and people are talking about how they're feeling, that's all really good stuff, and maybe wouldn't have happened before. But I just think really monitor it, because I think because it's now quite easy and we're all quite adept at the technology, it's very easy to go, oh, should we just have a Zoom call? Should we just have a Zoom call? Whereas normally you wouldn't do that. You just pick up the phone and have a conversation with somebody. So I think you just need to be careful that you've got the balance right. And always feel as though you can say, no, I don't want to do that. I've had too much of that today. It's still too easy to say yes to too much, and then that increases your anxiety and stress as well. So I think just be a bit mindful of how much time you're spending on your screen generally. We all know that that's has a massive impact on our mental health as well. So just try and divorce yourself from it a little bit. I'll just say one more thing, just quite an interesting observation, and we've noticed it in the last couple of weeks, that because we've not been able to run our fundraising events live for obvious reasons, and it's had a huge impact on our charitable income, we've had to do a lot of it on Zoom. We've done music quizzes and all sorts of things like that. And we're now starting to find it quite hard selling Teams to quizzes on Zoom, because people don't want to do it anymore because they're Zoomed out. So yeah, that's just another thing.
I completely agree with what you said about the idea of agency, and you can say no. If that's not going to be a situation where you'll perform at your best, you can say, let's have a call instead of a Zoom. Some of our agency CEOs have started to have ways of working of no desk needed is included in the meeting title, or having one-to-ones as a walking meeting. So that's where, maybe someone is able to get out to a local park and having a walking meeting. I've started doing those with my manager, and it's absolutely transformative. And why isn't that normal? I hope that's one of the things we actually keep.
I agree.
There was a second question I think is quite well linked to what you were saying, Kate. So the person in our audience is a bit concerned about what happens afterwards when some people are in the office and other people are at home. So they were looking for any tips or advice for those of you who will be 100% remote. So we've experienced the same thing at Dentsu. It's wonderful to be able to connect all of our people, no matter where they are, through the UK and Ireland or through the world. But what will happen when we go back to work, and some people, for either health reasons or because their offices are closed, are 100% remote, and others are in the office? Will there be a divide? And does anyone have any thoughts on how we can overcome that?
I probably feel a bit like that myself, because I live in a beautiful, as I said, village in Lancashire Hills, a far distance from what's going on in London and what's going on in Manchester, which is our nearest city up here. I think it's incumbent upon the individual to raise their hand and say, I've got a bit of a problem here, or I'm a little bit concerned. But it's more important that you have an empathetic leader who you can talk to, who recognises that as a potential issue and a concern for that employee, and does something about it. So finds a way to bring that person as close to what's going on in the organisation as they would be were they in the office. There should never be a stigma attached to that. a bit like when people go back to work part-time after having had a child, for example. That there should be space given for that, and there should be no judgment accorded to that either. There should be empathy, because this is about supporting your staff and making sure that they have all the tools that they need to do the best possible job, and to make sure that their professional and personal well-being is looked after. And it's a big responsibility of companies to do that.
Thank you. Dr. Jill, yes.
If I can add to that, because I think it's we were talking about the sort of how brilliant it would be for everyone to sort of be together again in terms of the sort of social contact and connection. But it's interesting, isn't it, when we're working remotely, the thing that we're all getting our jobs done, but the thing that you miss out on are those non-work social connection moments, when you both go and put the kettle on and make a coffee, and you get these 10 minutes or even 5 minutes to, ask how the kids are or what the last holiday was like. And then, and you get these moments where lots of small moments, but you're building those relationships over time, and you're feeling more connected, and you feel like you're in a place where you belong. And those sorts of things, having a sense of belonging and connection and trust with the people around you, I think is such an important part of job satisfaction, isn't it? And I guess that's something that those people who continue to work remotely could miss out on if the only meetings and Zoom calls that you have are business only. If you miss out on those small moments to connect, purely to build your relationships and be sociable and look after each other, that's where I think things could sort of be difficult for those people who are sort of remote more of the time, because they miss out on those little conversations that build relationships.
I agree. And actually, on our fundraising team, I'm on the fundraising team, there are 7 of us, and every Monday morning at 10 o'clock, we just have half an hour together, have a cup of tea. I think that's probably what we used to do in London, but now it's me and my assistant, Marianne, we join it as well. And we've ended up getting to know each other better than we probably would have done before, actually, because we're quite strict about it. It's no work talk. If someone says something about work, they get booed off the screen. I think it's important, as you say, I think it's really that connection thing is really important. And as I say, I think I know more about my colleagues now than I ever did and probably ever would have done. So yeah, I think you're right. That's absolutely crucial.
I like that. I think I'm going to have to incorporate that. I've seen some of our agencies do that as well, as this idea of actually carving out time to just have a conversation, because it feels like we're just back to back to back to back all day. And, that's why we have the Zoom fatigue, is we're just blundering from one meeting into another. Really interesting question from the audience that I wanted to pose to Will, please. So this person is struggling with eco-anxiety and feeling overwhelmed in the face of the climate crisis. Would you have any thoughts on from what you're doing with WWF and the Mental Health Foundation?
It's a tricky one, this, isn't it? And there's, almost on a daily basis, we have a big news item about the way climate change is accelerating all the loss of biodiversity around the world. I don't have a foolproof solution to this, but some of the things that I think may help would be making sure that, and this is good in general, I think, making sure that we're taking time out from the news each day, making sure perhaps we don't put on the news the first hour of the day, or we make sure that in the evening or lunchtime we don't listen to the news, and just give ourselves a break from that, or even expose ourselves to some of the more positive news sources there are. There's I don't know whether anybody's come across it, but there's a thing called Happy News, or the Happy Newspaper, which has got great stories about progress or success or good results. And in fact, yesterday, we released a report on the way that forests are regrowing around the world. So an area the size of France has grown cumulatively in lots of different countries over the last 20 years, regrown as natural forests. And it's been really, really popular in the media. We've been doing lots of interviews and things, because I think people want to be able to tell that success story. Of course, we need to caveat with the fact that we're losing forests at a very fast rate at the same time. But the other thing is, find your way to contribute. There's obviously lots of things we can do in our lifestyles now to reduce our footprint. Perhaps there's one other thing you can do through another organisation like us, or through a community organisation. Find your way to contribute, but don't feel like all rests on your shoulders, because it really is a collective effort. And remember, there's still a lot of beauty around us in nature, and let's remember and celebrate that. as well as part of our developing a healthy understanding of the state of nature. That's the best advice I can come up with, but I know it's a tricky one and it really will vary person to person, I think.
I would absolutely echo what you said. For me, it's been that idea of like action has been a great balm for anxiety. Is I can do something even if it feels small. Like I adopted a dolphin through WWF, and that brings me a bit of happiness because I get updates and things like that. But also sense checking your news sources. Oh my gosh, when you said that, I was like, yes, that I need to get better at that. I think it can be overwhelming. We can feel like it is on ourselves, but this goes back to the idea of sharing and exchanging and normalizing these conversations. The more that we say, I feel like this, and you feel seen and heard by someone else that says, oh my gosh, me too. You crack that barrier. You take down a bit of the mask that we all seem to try and build up to act like we have it all sorted and have it all together. So this idea of, we are all in this together. This is a shared human challenge, both mental health and the climate crisis. So the more that we can openly talk about that, I think the better we'll be.
That reminds me, that was the other thing I was going to add, is to talk about it and find a friendship group perhaps that has people of different views in it and have a conversation. I've organised a few over the last year with friends that were triggered by perhaps a new Netflix film or another one, and people have got questions, want to talk about it, and get it out there in the open, share it with friends, and that's a good thing to do anyway, because then we're improving awareness. But it does always help to kind of vocalise this, and people might have ideas or share the feelings that you have as well.
And then we have, I think, just one more, or just enough time for one more question from the audience, which I'd like to pose to Dr. Julie, please. So this person has lost the motivation to get outside and leave the house. It takes them ages to just get out the door. Do you have any thoughts on how they can get themselves to stop self-sabotaging?
Yeah, I think motivation is one of those things that it's, if we recognize it as a feeling like all others, we can't rely on it. It comes and goes and it won't always be there. But we know that we need to get out in order to maintain a sense of well-being and good health. And so when that motivation's gone right down and the energy levels are down and you really don't feel like it, it's going to be about making change as easy as possible. So that means breaking things right down to something that is manageable, not expecting yourself to go back to, being out every day and doing this and that and the other. It's what is that one thing that I could do today? But it would send me in the right direction. So what's that one promise I can make to myself that I know I can keep and I will keep day after day? Because if you do that small thing, you might not see it as enough in the bigger picture, but if you can maintain that, then you start to accumulate energy from that, and then you can build on it and build on it and build on it. And the thing about action and motivation is people kind of feel that I'll just wait until I feel like it. And the reality is we're never going to feel like it because action comes before motivation. And motivation is one of those wonderful kind of after effects of doing something that is very physically active or that feels meaningful to us or purposeful. And then, we work really hard on doing something when we don't feel like it. And then we get this lovely sort of pop of feeling where we want to do a little bit more or a little bit more. And so I think go easy on yourself. Self-criticism and self-attack doesn't help motivation, it makes it worse. So self-kindness is key. Make things as easy as possible by breaking it right down and building up over time, and come back to your values as well. Why is it that you want to get back out? Why is building your health back up so important to you? What is the sort of life you want to be having? What does that look like? When you do feel more energized, what will you be doing that's going to then keep you well, and really keep that sort of vision in mind of where you're headed, so that as you make progress, however small it is, it's heading you in the right direction.
Really, really like that. I need to rewatch and take some notes. Some people have actually asked, can we send around a few slides or sort of top tips? So yes, to everyone who's asked, we'll send around a bit of a debrief afterwards, so ways you can stay in touch with the speakers. But I really wanted to come to each of you now for sort of a closing statement, a bit of your final thoughts. Kate, could I come to you, please?
You can. I was just scribbling some notes while Dr. Julie was talking then, because I think I would say we're all individuals. We've all responded differently to what's happened, I think. And this is a personal thing. Be really honest with yourself about how you feel. And don't think it hasn't affected you, because it probably has. But as I say, it affects people in a different way. But when you've worked out what it is that it has done to you, or how you're feeling at the moment, then you can find your way through it, and you can find a way to be happier without sounding like that's a platitude. The other thing I would say is try and look at the positive, because positives have come from this. I know from a personal point of view that I've appreciated the simple things a lot more than I ever have. I've taken a lot for granted, and I never want to do that again. Even the things like, going to the pub. I haven't seen my mum since August. I'm seeing her in 3 weeks' time. I've never taken her for granted, but just being able to get in the car and drive 300 miles to see her is something that I could do anytime, and I haven't been able to. So I just think recognise what's really important and appreciate it. That's what I'd say.
That's excellent advice. Will, may we come to you, please?
Yeah, I think the last thing I would add, just encourage people to engage with Mental Health Awareness Week that's going on at the moment, which has the theme of nature. And through the Mental Health Foundation, WWF and others, there's some good tips available on how to engage with nature for mental health. And maybe as part of the week, if you don't normally, or if you do anyway, take a lunch break outside or whatever it is, get outside and take a picture, or you could take a picture and share it with the hashtag Connect with Nature this week, and contribute to the Mental Health Awareness Week this week, or keep it to yourself, enjoy it, savor it, and just know that that has been good for you, and congratulate yourself on it, and maybe do it again later in the week or next week. So just encourage people to really engage with that this week, and through the week as well. We hope to be able to raise a voice and make sure that everybody can access nature in a way that's safe and close to them.
Brilliant. And Dr. Julie?
Yeah, I agree with both of what the other two are saying, and I think there is a huge psychological fallout to everything that we've collectively been through, and so I think remembering that small things add up, but also sometimes huge things like this can trigger a bit of reevaluation. So it's okay to also come back to, your own set of values around, and certainly in the work environment, lots of people I think have reevaluated whether they want to be in, the big city or in an office every day, or whether they want to be working from home, all those sorts of things. And it gets us thinking, asking the questions around, what do I want my life to look like, and what kind of person do I want to be in that life? And sometimes coming back to those values, what really matters, can help sort of give us a compass about, where we want to go and in what direction we want to move in. And that's when it becomes, sorry, I've got a big lorry going past me. That's when it becomes easier to focus on doing the things that help, because we have that sense of meaning and purpose about what we're trying to create along the way. So, anyone who sort of wants more sort of tips and help, then I share lots of videos on Instagram with different tips and ideas about how to sort of manage your own mental health independently and work on that, and also how to seek help if you feel that that's necessary. So they can find me on Instagram if that's helpful.
Absolutely. So we'll be sending around all of your links, links for NABS, and links to WWF and the Thriving with Nature guide to everyone after the session. And then this session will, of course, be available on demand, both as a video, but then also as a podcast form. So that if people want to do a catch up or share it with their team, they can pop in their headphones and maybe go for a walk and listen and get a bit of that off-screen digital detox we were talking about. So thank you so much to our incredible panelists, both for your time today and for the work that you do in your wonderful day jobs. It's been a great conversation. Thanks to everyone in the chat as well for your comments and for your questions. And thanks Harish and Rebecca for making the session happen. Have a great day, everyone, and keep thriving. Bye.